June 14th, 1944, northern France. 0430 hours. The morning belongs to the mosquitoes. Private First Class. James Callahan slaps his neck for the 100th time this hour. His hand comes away smeared with blood, his own, and the crushed body of another Anopheles, a maculipennis. Around him, in the fetid marshland 2 miles inland from Utah Beach, 200 men from the 4th Infantry Division are supposed to be establishing a forward supply depot. Instead, they're fighting an enemy that doesn't wear a uniform. The air hums with wings, thousands of them, millions. The insects swarm so thick that Callahan can barely see Corporal Davis 10 feet away, who's scratching his arms raw, his face already swelling. Medic Thompson moves between the men, his aid bag nearly empty of calamine lotion. His morphine supply untouched, because morphine can't stop this torture. 3 men have already been evacuated with fevers. 1 is delirious, screaming about insects crawling under his skin. The Germans don't need to counterattack this position. The mosquitoes are doing their work for them. Captain Robert Hayes stands at the center of this chaos, swatting uselessly at the cloud around his head, watching his unit disintegrate before his eyes. The radios crackle with similar reports from every position along the invasion front. Supply lines disrupted, men unable to sleep, morale collapsing not from artillery or machine guns, but from insects so small you can crush them between your fingers. Hayes doesn't know it yet, but standing at the edge of his perimeter, largely ignored by command staff and combat troops alike, is a man whose service record lists him as Agricultural Specialist, Quartermaster Corps. A man who spent the last 20 years keeping bees in rural Pennsylvania. A man who right now is watching the swarm with different eyes than everyone else. His name is Leonard Crane. What he's about to do will change the course of the war. If you believe that the smallest soldiers can win the biggest battles, stay with this story, because what happens next defies everything the generals thought they knew about warfare. The problem facing the Allied invasion of Europe in June 1944 isn't supposed to be insects. Allied planners spent 3 years studying German fortifications, beach gradients, tidal patterns, and Wehrmacht troop dispositions. They calculated tonnage requirements for fuel, ammunition, and food. They designed specialized tanks and landing craft. They rehearsed amphibious assaults on British beaches that mirrored Norman geography. They planned for casualties in the tens of thousands. Nobody planned for the mosquitoes. Northern France in 1944 is a landscape deliberately flooded. The Germans, anticipating invasion, opened irrigation locks and breached drainage systems across thousands of acres of Norman farmland. Fields that grew wheat and barley now stagnate under 2 feet of water. The hedgerows, those dense ancient earthen walls, topped with vegetation that will soon become infamous to American infantry, now border not fields, but swamps. It's perfect mosquito habitat, and June is breeding season. Within 72 hours of D-Day, field hospitals report something the medical corps didn't anticipate. Not just injuries from combat, but a spike in insect-borne illness. Malaria, thankfully, is rare in northern France, but the psychological and physical toll of constant mosquito assault is immediate and measurable. Men lose sleep. They scratch until they bleed, creating infection risks. Some develop severe allergic reactions. Combat effectiveness drops. A report from Sekvenkorps, dated June 11, 1944, notes units reporting 15 to 30% reduction in operational readiness due to insect-related sleep deprivation and distraction. Standard issue repellents proving inadequate. Request immediate supply of additional deterrents. But supply lines are still fragile. The artificial harbors, the famous mulberries, aren't yet fully operational. Every cubic foot of cargo space aboard ships crossing the channel is allocated to artillery shells, medical supplies, and rations. There's no room for industrial quantities of citronella or pyrethrum-based repellents. even if such stockpiles existed in England. The Office of Strategic Services receives intelligence that German troops who've occupied France for 4 years have adapted to local conditions. They use netting. They time activities to avoid peak mosquito hours at dusk and dawn. They know which areas to avoid. The Americans, arriving en masse and pushing rapidly inland, have no such institutional knowledge. By mid-June, the mosquito problem threatens to slow the entire invasion timetable. Eisenhower's staff discusses it in briefings. Medical officers write urgent memoranda. Everyone agrees something must be done. Nobody knows what. Leonard Crane is 47 years old, too old for combat infantry, too specialized for anything but his peculiar assignment. He grew up outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where his family kept 30 hives and sold honey at farmers' markets. He learned beekeeping from his father, who learned from his father, in a craft that stretches back centuries. Crane enlisted in 1942 after Pearl Harbor, expecting to be rejected for age. Instead, the Army Quartermaster Corps discovered his background and assigned him to a new program, agricultural specialists attached to invasion forces. The theory was that as the Allies liberated territory, they'd need people who understood local farming, who could assess crop viability and livestock health, who could help restart food production. It's a good theory, but in June 1944, nobody's thinking about next year's wheat harvest. They're thinking about surviving the next night without going insane from mosquito bites. Crane has no command authority. He's not medical staff. He's not even supposed to be at forward positions. His official post is with supply depots 10 miles to the rear. But he's been wandering the invasion zone, largely invisible, trying to understand the agricultural landscape, and he's noticed something that everyone else is too busy or too stressed to see. The mosquitoes swarm everywhere, but they don't swarm evenly. Near certain areas, around specific farms, particular buildings, the density drops, not dramatically, but noticeably. Crane, with a beekeeper's trained observation of insect behavior, picks up on patterns that combat soldiers, medics, even entomologists wouldn't register. He starts asking questions. When he finds a partially intact French farmhouse with an elderly woman still living there, he uses his broken French and pantomime to ask, "Les moustiques? How do you keep them away?" She shows him her technique. It's simple, ancient, effective. Smoke, but not just any smoke. Mosquitoes have been humanity's enemy longer than any army. Malaria has killed more humans than all wars combined. Yellow fever emptied cities. Dengue fever ends military campaigns. Every pre-industrial society developed methods to cope, and those methods always involved fire, but not all smoke is equal. The French farmers of Normandy discovered long ago that burning certain materials produces smoke that repels mosquitoes far more effectively than ordinary wood smoke, dried herbs, agricultural waste, and, crucially, certain plant materials mixed with honey or sugar water. The honey trick works because of chemistry. When honey is heated slowly, not burned fast, but smoldered, it produces a complex mixture of organic compounds. Some of these compounds are naturally repellent to mosquitoes. Others disrupt the insect's CO2 sensing mechanisms, making it harder for them to locate human hosts. The farmers would take old honeycomb, scraps from beekeeping operations, mix it with dried grasses and herbs like lavender or thyme, pack it into clay pots or metal containers, then set it to smolder. The resulting smoke creates a protective zone, not perfect, not total, but enough to make sleeping possible, enough to make outdoor work tolerable. Crane recognizes this immediately. He's used similar techniques in Pennsylvania, not for mosquitoes, but to calm aggressive bee colonies during hive inspections. Beekeepers call it smoking the hive. The principle is identical. The difference is scale. In Pennsylvania, Crane used a handheld smoker for a few dozen square feet. Here, in France, he needs to protect hundreds of men across acres of territory. He starts experimenting on June 16th. The failures come first. They always do. Crane requisitions honey from supply stocks. The quartermaster looks at him like he's insane. Honey is a luxury item, carefully rationed. But Crane's official designation gives him access. He scrounges metal containers, old ration tins, ammunition boxes, anything that won't melt or catch fire catastrophically. His first attempt produces smoke so thick it chokes the men it's supposed to protect. His second burns too hot, consuming the mixture in minutes. His third produces almost no smoke at all. Captain Hayes watches these experiments with barely concealed frustration. Crane, we need solutions, not science projects. But Hayes is desperate enough not to order him to stop. The breakthrough comes when Crane remembers wet hay. In Pennsylvania, when bees got aggressive during drought, you needed the smoke to last, to stay cool, to produce thick clouds without flame. You mixed the honeycomb with damp grass, with green plant material that would smolder for hours. Northern France in June isn't suffering from drought. Finding wet vegetation is easy. On June 18th, Crane assembles his mixture, honeycomb and honey diluted with water, mixed with freshly cut grass, dried herbs scrounged from abandoned gardens, all packed loosely into vented metal containers. He places them around the perimeter of Captain Hayes's position. He lights them just before dusk when mosquito activity peaks. Then he waits. The smoke rises in thin, steady columns, not billowing clouds, but persistent streamers that hang close to the ground in the still evening air. The smell is strange, sweet, herbal, with an undertone of burning vegetation. The men notice immediately, not because the mosquitoes disappear, they don't, but because the density drops. The constant whining hum diminishes. Men can talk without mosquitoes flying into their mouths. They can eat rations without insects landing on every bite. They can close their eyes without feeling wings brush their eyelids. Private Callahan, who hasn't slept more than 3 hours in the past 4 days, lies down in his foxhole at 2100 hours. He expects to spend another night in itching, swatting misery. He sleeps 6 hours straight. At U-600 on June 19th, Captain Hayes conducts an informal survey. 70% of his men report the best sleep since landing. Medic Thompson records 0 new cases of severe insect-related distress. The smoke containers are still smoldering, 12 hours after lighting. Hayes radios battalion headquarters. We may have something here. The response is skeptical. Colonel Marcus, commanding the 3rd Battalion, has been receiving reports of miracle cures and folk remedies since the invasion began. None have worked. He's not optimistic about burning honey, but he's also not getting any solutions from official channels. Supplies of chemical repellents remain inadequate. The mosquito problem continues to drain combat readiness across the entire beachhead. Fine, Marcus tells Hayes. Scale it up. Let's see if it works for more than one company. Scaling up means solving logistics problems that would challenge an industrial operation. Crane needs honey, lots of it. The invasion quartermaster supplies, designed to feed hundreds of thousands of men, include some honey, but not nearly enough for what Crane envisions. He needs dozens of gallons, and every gallon diverted means less sugar or jam for troops' morale. He makes his case to Major William Foster, the divisional supply officer, with data from Hayes's company, improved sleep, reduced medical incidents, better alertness. Foster is skeptical but pragmatic. He approves a 1-week trial for an entire battalion. The honey arrives from England, requisitioned from civilian stocks, which means British beekeepers are suddenly contributing to the war effort in ways they never imagined. Crane organizes teams to gather green vegetation, to prepare metal containers, to distribute the smoking devices across battalion perimeters. The operation goes into effect on June 22nd. Within 3 days, Casualty reports and readiness assessments show measurable improvement. Not dramatic. This isn't a miracle drug, but consistent. Units using Crane's smoke system report 20 to 30% fewer sleep-related issues. Medical evacuations for insect-related distress drop by half. More importantly, commanders notice something harder to quantify. Morale improves. Men who aren't spending every waking moment swatting mosquitoes have mental energy for their actual jobs. They complain less. They fight better. Word spreads through the beachhead. Other units want the smoke system. British commanders hear about it and request details. Their troops face the same mosquito populations. The system isn't perfect. On windy days, the smoke disperses ineffectively. In heavy rain, the containers extinguish. But on still nights, which is when mosquitoes are worst anyway, it works. By early July, production is formalized. Engineers design improved container systems with better ventilation and longer burn times. Supply officers establish honey procurement channels. Agricultural specialists like Crane, previously peripheral figures, suddenly find themselves in demand as consultants. The system even gets a name, half affectionate, half mocking, Crane's honeypots. The impact becomes clear in after-action reports from the summer of 1944. The 4th Infantry Division's combat effectiveness assessments for July show a marked improvement in night operations compared to June. The 90th Infantry Division adopts the system by mid-July and reports similar results. The mosquito problem doesn't vanish. Mosquitoes don't surrender, but it becomes manageable. A medical study conducted in August by Army researchers notes implementation of honeycomb-based smoke deterrent systems correlates with 25% reduction in insect-related medical complaints, an estimated 15 to 20% improvement in sleep quality among forward troops. Recommendation: continue and expand program. But the real measure of success isn't in statistics, it's in letters home. A private from the 29th Infantry Division writes to his family in Virginia, "You wouldn't believe what's keeping us sane here. Some genius figured out how to burn honey and grass to keep the damn mosquitoes away. Still plenty around, but I can actually sleep now." Small miracle. A lieutenant's diary entry from July 15th. "Used Crane's pots for first time tonight. Men actually smiled. Haven't seen that in weeks." The innovation spreads beyond France. When Allied forces invade southern France in August, Operation Dragoon, they bring honeypots with them. When troops enter Italy's Po Valley, where mosquitoes and malaria are endemic, the system is already in place. British forces adopt variations for operations in Southeast Asia, where insect-borne disease is an even greater threat. The total number of soldiers affected is impossible to calculate precisely, but estimates suggest that over the summer and fall of 1944, more than 2 million Allied troops benefit from Crane's system in some form. The amount of honey consumed for this purpose exceeds 150,000 pounds, a significant diversion of resources, but one that commanders consider worthwhile given the return on combat effectiveness. German intelligence, always vigilant for Allied innovations, notes the smoke systems in reports. But by summer 1944, the Wehrmacht has more pressing concerns than American mosquito repellent. The war is moving east toward Germany itself. Leonard Crane never receives a medal for his innovation. There's no dramatic ceremony, no battlefield commendation. The Army's recognition system, designed for valor in combat or exceptional leadership, has no clear category for figured out how to help millions of soldiers sleep better by burning honeycomb. He continues his work with the Quartermaster Corps through the end of the war, helping assess agricultural conditions in liberated territory, advising on food production, occasionally setting up honeypot systems when needed. His service record notes him as satisfactory in performance evaluations. The same rating given to thousands of other support personnel doing unglamorous but essential work. After VE Day, Crane returns to Pennsylvania. He goes back to keeping bees, to selling honey at markets, to the quiet rural life he left in 1942. He rarely talks about the war. When he does, he focuses on the French farmers he met, the landscape he saw, not on his own contribution. His obituary in 1968 mentions his World War II service in one line. Served with the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps in Europe, 1942-1945. No mention of mosquitoes, no mention of honey, no mention of innovation that affected millions. This is how history forgets. The official U.S. Army history of World War II logistics mentions insect control measures in a single paragraph, crediting various field expedients developed by personnel in theater without naming individuals. British military histories occasionally reference American smoke systems as part of public health measures during the invasion. French local histories of the Norman campaign sometimes mention les pots de miel américains, the American honeypots, as a curious detail of the occupation period. But Leonard Crane's name appears in none of these accounts. His contribution survives primarily in scattered letters, diary entries, and unit records, the kind of primary sources that historians dig through decades later, finding small stories within the larger narrative. In the 1990s, a researcher studying agricultural aspects of World War II logistics uncovered references to Crane's work and published a brief article in a specialized journal. A few military historians picked up the story, though it remains obscure compared to more dramatic innovations like radar or the atomic bomb. If this story matters to you, if you believe forgotten ingenuity deserves recognition, then remember this: the grandest victories often rest on the smallest innovations. The lesson of Leonard Crane isn't about honey or mosquitoes. It's about seeing problems differently. While commanders thought in terms of supply chains and chemical warfare, a beekeeper thought in terms of insect behavior and ancient agricultural knowledge. While planners tried to requisition industrial solutions, a farmer applied folk wisdom at scale. While experts declared the mosquito problem intractable, an amateur found a workable answer. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The innovation that saves lives or wins battles often comes not from research laboratories or strategic planning offices, but from individuals who combine specialized knowledge with practical necessity. The hedgerow cutters welded from German beach obstacles, the jury-rigged armor on transport vehicles, the field modifications to weapons and equipment that never appeared in the technical manuals. War, for all its industrial scale and technological sophistication, still depends on human creativity in response to immediate problems. Crane had no authority to demand resources or command personnel. He had no formal training in entomology or chemistry. What he had was observation skills honed by decades of watching insect behavior, practical knowledge of how smoke affects flying insects, and the willingness to experiment when official channels had no answers. He also had desperation, not his own. Crane himself was never in direct combat danger, but the desperation of watching men around him suffer needlessly. That empathy, that inability to accept suffering as inevitable, drove him to try. The mosquitoes of northern France in 1944 killed no one directly. They won no battles for Germany. But they drained the strength and morale of soldiers who then had to fight German positions, advance through hedgerows, hold ground against counterattacks. Every hour of lost sleep, every distraction in combat, every medical evacuation for infected bites contributed to the friction of war, the countless small problems that slow armies and cost lives. By solving one small problem, Crane removed friction. He made the machinery of war run slightly smoother. Multiply that small improvement across millions of soldiers and hundreds of days, and the cumulative impact becomes enormous. even if it's impossible to quantify precisely. Today, the fields of northern France are drained and productive again. The hedgerows remain, though many were removed in post-war agricultural modernization. Mosquitoes still breed there in summer, but in manageable numbers. Tourists visit the D-Day beaches, walking ground where men like Private Callahan fought not just Germans but insects, exhaustion, and the grinding misery of war. No monument commemorates Leonard Crane. No museum exhibit displays the honeypots. The technique itself is mostly obsolete. Modern repellents using DEET and other synthetic compounds work better, though the principle of smoke deterrence still has applications in low-resource environments. But the story survives. In scattered records, in the letters of men who slept better because of burning honeycomb, in the after-action reports that note improved readiness without understanding why. It survives in the principle that every innovation, every solution, every act of creative problem-solving in wartime has a human origin, an individual who refused to accept impossible. Leonard Crane was not a general or a scientist. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He never fired a shot in combat. His contribution won't appear in most history textbooks. But on June nights in 1944, when the smoke from his honeypots rose into the Norman air and American soldiers slept peacefully for the first time since landing, he was as vital to victory as any tank commander or fighter pilot. He saw a problem everyone else accepted as unsolvable. He remembered techniques from his Pennsylvania beehives. He experimented until he found an answer, and he gave that answer to anyone who needed it. That's the measure of service that history too often overlooks. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't a machine. It's a mind that refuses to accept there's no solution. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with bullets, but with honey, smoke, and the stubborn belief that every problem, no matter how small, no matter how persistent, can be beaten if you're willing to think differently and work hard enough. The mosquitoes of 1944 are long dead. But the lesson of Leonard Crane endures. Innovation comes from unexpected places. Genius wears ordinary clothes. And heroes rarely look like what we expect them to look like. Remember his name. Remember what he did. And remember that the next time someone tells you a problem is impossible to solve, somewhere there's a beekeeper with an idea